author, Tess Gerritsen, is also a physician, bringing her firsthand knowledge of emergency and autopsy rooms to her novels. But Tess' interests span far more than medicine and crime. As an anthropology student at Stanford University, she catalogs centuries-old human remains, and she travels the world, inspired by her fascination with ancient cultures and bizarre natural phenomena. This promises to be a very interesting interview. Tess, welcome to Thriller Talk.
Oh, thank you. It's going to be fun to be here.
We always love having you on. It's always a pleasure. So in Listen to Me, you focus on Jane Rizzoli's mom, Angela, which I really enjoyed, and I feel like it's a fresh take on the new series. What was the reason behind this fun change of pace?
Well, I had thought that I was finished with Jane and Maura. After 12 books, I wanted to do other things. But as the reason for why I keep on writing these books, it's the characters that come to me and want a story. So, in Boston, you hear if you see something, say something, right? Ever since 9/11, and I heard Angela's voice say that to me, and I thought, what is she seeing? Why is she telling me this? And immediately, I just wanted to dive into her world. She lives in a suburb. She looks out her living room window all the time. Her husband has left her, so now she's living alone. And she's a pretty clever, pretty observant woman. And I thought, well, I want to see what Angela is looking at across the street. And what she's looking at across the street are a pair of very suspicious brand new neighbors. So that launched the story. I had no idea what else was going to go on in the book, but it was all because the character just wanted to talk to me.
I love the fact that Angela is so relatable, and that's what I think what you really nailed in this. That she's an everyday woman in extraordinary circumstances, and who doesn't love being that nosy neighbor?
I know, and it was the question was how far was I going to let her go, because she was taking it sometimes too far. But we have a lot of us are familiar with nosy neighbors, and and with Angela's. In Angela's defense, she does it out of the goodness of her heart. She really does care about her neighborhood. She's not malicious in any way. She is really concerned when she thinks something is going wrong.
Wow.
Well, Tess, first off, congrats on the publication of Listen to Me. I read somewhere online that you actually started writing when you were on maternity leave. And as someone with 6 kids, I'm amazed that you could get anything done with a newborn. So how did you decide that was the right time to start writing?
Well, I had been working as a doctor, so I was already working long hours in the hospital. And then I finally got on maternity leave, and I had an infant who loved to sleep. He slept all the time. And, I was just blessed with this kid. By the way, he still sleeps a lot, and he's 40 now. But during those times when he would take his naps, I thought, well, I've always wanted to write a book. Now is my chance, because now I'm home from the hospital. And that's how it happened. It's I owe it all to my son's excellent sleeping habits.
I'm glad it worked out so incredibly well for you, because like Brian said, it's hard to imagine diving into that. But obviously you have a lot of staying power with the doctor and newborn writing. I love this.
Imagine being so busy that you finally have a baby, you're on maternity leave, and you're like, break.
So. Medical training is awfully it's awfully demanding. It's I was working 80 hours a week, and every third night, of course, you don't get to sleep because you're at the hospital. So it was in a way a break, but on the other hand, at least when you work in a hospital, you know that 2 out of 3 nights you can sleep all night. That's not true with an infant. I mean, an infant, you'll never get a full night's sleep until they're a couple months old.
Wow. So as we talked about in the introduction, I find it very fascinating that you're into ancient cultures. Can you tell a story from one of your adventures researching these?
Okay. Well, one of the fun stories was, and the fun stories always end up in a book somewhere. So because I'm interested in Egyptology, and we're all interested in mummies. I think when you go to a museum and there's a mummy in that museum, everybody wants to stop and look at it. So I ended up corresponding with an Egyptologist who had a special program in the United States where they would do a CAT scan of every Egyptian mummy they could find in the U.S. just for research purposes. So he invited me to watch a CAT scan of a mummy that had never been examined before. And that's how I ended up in a hospital in a CT scan room with a 2,000-year-old man. And it was that whole situation where just hearing that mummies are scanned in hospitals in the US. They actually come into regular patient hospitals and they're put through the same machines that you and I would be scanned in. And I recall that when we were standing there watching the X-ray cuts of that body, we got down to the thigh bone, and it was broken. And I thought, well, maybe that's how he died. And I learned something very interesting at that point, which is a lot of mummies have broken limbs, and it's not because they got these injuries while they were alive. When legs are broken in mummies, it's because whoever was building the coffin didn't measure right, and they had to shove a body into the coffin, so they would just break legs. So anyway, it's those funny little details that come to you while you're in the middle of an experience that end up turning into a book, and so that ended up in a book, which was The Keepsake, about modern day homicide victims that are made to look like ancient mummies.
Brilliant. I love that story.
Fascinating.
So I think that most writers, I'm often asked, what's the best training you can have to be a writer? And I always say, pay attention to your life. Pay attention to every experience you have, and take things out of your profession, whatever it may be. I know a lot of people think, well, all I do is I'm just a school teacher. And I think, wow, there's a lot of material there when you're a school teacher, or an airline mechanic, or a pilot. I mean, there are so many things that we don't know about other people's professions that become really interesting if you can write about them.
Is it true that you write by hand without an outline? And how has your writing process changed, if at all, over the course of your career?
Oh gosh. Okay. I have tried to change my writing process again and again. I've tried to type out the first draft, and I've never been able to. I have tried to outline, and I've done it repeatedly. And every time I come up with this fairly good outline, I always go off. I could veer off the path, and the outline is left way behind. It's just it's an acceptance of your process that I think is what comes with maturity as a writer. You learn that this is the way I do it. I don't know how to do it any other way, and it's okay. Yeah. So yeah, that's true. I still write. 31 books later, I'm still writing my first drafts with pen and paper. Now, people always ask, which pen? And I just like, it's a big pen. That's all I use. And I buy them by the caseloads, and I always write an unlined typing paper. I don't use lined paper because I feel that somehow it interferes with the creative process.
Wow.
And process is such a mysterious thing for most of us. We get to do it a certain way, and we can't get out of it. I don't know if you've heard this, maybe an apocryphal story about the writer who had young children, tried to get them to leave her alone while she was working on her manuscript. So she had a chef's hat, and she'd put on this chef's hat as a signal to her kids, when mommy's wearing this, leave her alone. So, okay, it worked. And then years later, the kids are grown up and out of the house. She can't write without that stupid hat on. So she still puts the hat on. And that is an example of how we get ingrained in our processes, and we can't create without them. But that's all right. Just keep on doing what you're doing.
Do you save these handwritten manuscripts?
I do, because there is a women's collection at a local university that would like them. Now they're piling up, and I want to just toss them out. So I don't know what anybody is going to do with them, but it is I guess it's an insight into where my first drafts go. And my first drafts, because I don't outline, because I'm just like, I just jump in and see what happens, they are a complete mess. And very often I'll get into the middle of a book and say, well, that's a book. That's a blind alley. Let's go in a different way. So another part of my process is I don't stop to edit. I don't stop to change things. I just keep on writing. And I just know as I'm progressing that I have to go back and fix this later on.
Well, one more follow-up, because this fascinates me, because I can't imagine doing it like this. So many of us as writers, like when we're working on a manuscript, you go by word count. So here you are on unlined printing paper, writing by hand. Do you just have a really good feel for a length of your novels?
Yeah, well, I do. My handwriting is pretty tight. So if I write five handwritten pages, I know that's about 1,000 words.
Wow.
And then when I type it in, yeah, it works out about that way. So I know approximately whether I'm making my page quota for that day, and
That's
it's
so cool.
yeah, 4 pages of handwritten. That's good enough.
And your hand doesn't get sore, because that's the one thing I've noticed since we've gone to computers, is that when I start writing anything handwritten, I guess maybe you just strengthen that muscle.
I guess so. No, I never get sore, but it's not constant. It's you write a paragraph, you stop, you think. Write a paragraph, you stop, and think. So there's a lot of rest in between, and it is really important though to have like to use a pen that glides very easily, so you don't have that. But on the other hand, I do have calluses. I mean, I think those of us who work with longhand, we get these bumps on our fingers, and I have a thumb that's got all kinds of weird little bumps on it. It's because the right hand has been busy for the last 30 years.
Well, we appreciate that very much. As a change of pace, you wrote a historical story called Playing with Fire, about a classical violinist who discovers a piece of music that linked to the Holocaust. And I wondered what inspired this story, and was it helpful to have historical research, kind of as fodder for the plot, or did you find it a bit distracting because traditionally, right, you don't go into the historical bent?
No, I've only written two historical novels in my entire career, and that was one of them. The what sets off a book is very mysterious to me. It's a very emotional process, and I was in Venice for my birthday when I had a nightmare. I dreamt about a baby playing a violin, and this is a weird little dream. The baby is sitting next to me playing a violin, and I know that the music that this baby was playing was something really beautiful and dark. And then the baby turned into a monster. I mean, its eyes glowed red and it turned into a monster, and I woke up. So when I have a nightmare like that, I always think, what's going on here? Is there a story in this? I knew immediately there was some kind of a story about music awakening a monster. And I walked around Venice that day, and I ended up in the old Jewish quarter. And there are a number of memorials there to the 246 Jews who died from Venice. And there's a wooden plaque with names of the victims. And there was one group of names that they all had the last name, and you could see that they were probably a family. And it's just like, it just came to me. I said, this is my story. It's about music, it's about the Holocaust, it's about where this mysterious piece of music came from. And that led to the book Playing with Fire, about a modern day violinist who buys a handwritten piece of music in a Rome antique shop, takes it home, and every time she plays it on her violin, her 3-year-old daughter goes berserk and does something horrible. So that's the music inspiring the monster. Now, the rest of the story is she wants to know, what is it about this piece that is doing this? Why? Where does it come from? Like, she doesn't even know who wrote it. It just it's all handwritten. So she has to go back to Italy to uncover this. And then I have in inner cutting sections the historical part that deals with the 1940s in Venice and the rise of the Holocaust in Italy, and where does this music come from? Who is the man who composed it? So it's a present day, past day story that's 70 years apart, but you see where this music came from. Now,
Mm.
the really mysterious part of this, and this is where I think the subconscious is an amazing thing. As I was writing this book, I had to describe this piece of music. It was, because it was fictional, it didn't exist. And the more I described it, the more I must have absorbed it into my subconscious, because I woke up from another dream. And this dream was the music. And I could hear the entire piece in my head when I woke up. So because I'm a pianist and violinist, I was able to write that music down immediately. And it turned into a musical composition, which was later recorded by a excellent world famous violinist. And that was a music called Incendio. So it was a strange project where the story came from a dream, the music came from a dream, and they informed each other, the music and the story.
Yeah, you're
That's so
amazing,
cool.
Tess. Like, I can't believe like how you have the right and left brain connection. I mean, you're so creative and talented, but also medicine is completely the opposite. It's amazing. Wow.
Well, medicine, I think, is just as I tell many people, medicine does not better writer. I think medicine, in some ways, kind of gets in the way. It's good for source material, but I'm not sure it helps all that much with creativity because you are, as you said, you're using your science part of your brain and your logical part of your brain, and that doesn't help free up the emotions that you sometimes need to write a story.
It's good for editing, probably. That's when you turn it on, right?
Very good for editing. Yes.
Yep.
That's all. I need to start having more productive dreams. Is my takeaway here.
I think dreams are nightmares in particular are really useful to us writers because they awaken these fears, and you have to, when you wake up, you have to think about, what am I afraid of? How do I use this in a story? And in fact, I think that when I come to a point in a day or something, or an experience that freaks me out, I know that's a story. I just have to figure out what it is that's bothering me.
Well, I, for one, am so happy to see Rizzoli and Isles back. Did you ever think when the first book came out, and that was Surgeon in like 2001, right?
Right.
Did you ever think back then you'd still be writing these books today?
No, The Surgeon was a one-off. It was supposed to be a single, a single title thing. I introduced Jane Rizzoli, and she was a secondary character. She was never supposed to survive that book. I had her death kind of in my mind, and as I was writing this story, because I thought she was going to die, I didn't bother making her very likable. So if you're reading The Surgeon and you think, "Oh, this Jane Rizzoli is a bitch," it's true because she was going to die. I didn't care. But as happens when you create a character and they come alive for you in the process of that first draft, she began to grow on me, and I understood why she was a bitch. I understood that she was unhappy. I understood she was fighting for respect. And by the end of the book, she's really the one who comes through. So by that by her death scene, I realized I couldn't kill her, and she survived. And then you finish your manuscript and you think, I wonder what happens to her next. So that's how the second book came along, and the second book introduces Maura Isles, again secondary character. And I thought, she's very mysterious. I don't understand her, so I had to write a third book with Maura, and that's how it began. It's because the characters keep pulling you back into their world.
It's fascinating though, because the late 90s, early 2000s, which is sort of like that golden age of thrillers and mystery novels. So many of you guys starting out, Daniel Silva and Michael Connolly, CJ Box, all have said they didn't intend to write series. They were writing one-offs. And then these characters are all still alive today. And then you have today's wave of authors, and everyone's trying to launch a series. And I don't know what to make of that, but I find it fascinating,
Well, I think that once people get attached to a set of characters, they want to read more about them. I mean, it's like watching a good television series.
Sure.
You don't watch it for the plot. You watch it because you want to see what happens to these people next. And publishing realized that. When I got started writing back in the mid, I wrote my first thriller in mid '90s. I was advised that one-offs are the way to go. You'll sell more copies, you'll get movie rights. It just makes more sense to not do series, because at the time series felt small. It felt like, your cute little mystery series with this detective, and so it's funny, I avoided doing a series because of that advice. And now, of course, the advice is completely different. It just shows you
Completely
nobody
different.
knows anything, right?
Yeah.
If only we could be, a future reader, then we would know what's next, right? Ready to write that. It's
Right.
great.
I mean, I'm just like, think about the vampire craze that came, and it's lasted a long time before it went away, and then zombies, and we just don't know what we're on the cusp of.
Mhm. Yeah, and I'm startled by how Gone Girl has perpetuated the psychological thriller, for like a decade. I mean, this is just really remarkable. So I'm intrigued to see what's going to be trending next. And when it comes to titles, I love Listen to Me. I'm enjoying the titles that are coming out that are also phrases, like that people use. How do you come up with this title, and what do you think is so compelling about these grabby phrases?
Well, I come up with about 50% of my titles. And I have to give full credit to my British publisher, the editor, because I had originally called it Mrs. Rizzoli. And of course, everybody said, well, not everybody knows who Mrs. Rizzoli is. That means nothing. So we went through, and this is the title search is so long and arduous. And you probably know it. Sometimes it just takes forever to find just the right title. So luckily, my British editor has a young child, and she was in the bath. She was trying to give this kid a bath and trying to get the kid to pay attention. And she said, "Will you listen to me?" And I guess she must have sat up and went, "Hey, that's a title."
It's a good title. It's a great
It's a great title. So I give all credit to her. Thank you, Sarah. And in fact, the last couple of books, I have not come up with a title. It's been either a friend or an editor or an agent. Um, it sometimes is a committee. It's a committee that gets together.
Mm.
One of the best methods of coming up with a title was in England. My British publisher at the time said, "Okay, we need a title." So we all went out. She brought out a bottle of champagne. She shut the door and she goes, "We're not leaving until we get a title." So we're like, half a dozen of us getting slowly drunk, trying to come up with something. And yes, sure enough, the Bone Garden came out of that drinking session.
It's awesome.
Now
Yeah,
we hear the real secrets behind these titles. I love it.
yeah, champagne and locked doors. That may be the way to do it. You can't leave until you come up with a title.
You've written standalones, you've co-authored books, you have your series. How is writing a series different than penning other books? And do you ever feel pressure to top yourself?
You always feel pressure to top yourself. That is never going to go away. Um, I write, I get into these moods, right? I mean, there are times when I don't want to look at Jane and Maura, and that's probably why at book number 12 I said, "I'm done with you girls, go away." Um, and I think that what I love doing is the standalone because that's the one that just feels fresher. These are people you don't know. You're dealing with a subject that you've never dealt with before. And they are a lot of fun. They also require, of course, a lot more research because you're probably going in a different direction. As with Playing with Fire, I spent a year just studying the Holocaust in Italy and Jews in Italy and what happened in that particular section of the world at that terrible time. And you learn stuff. So I think that that's the joy of a standalone is you you get to play something different. You get to do something completely different. Um, and then, but this particular case, it was the voice of Angela that drew me back into the series. So as I get older, I feel that I have less and less time to write the books I want to write, and that's really what's urging me on now. Is these stories, get them out now while I still am able to.
I really like that, and I think that it's empowering because the ideas come quite often, right? But when you really find something that means something to you, that's when you want to tell that story. So I feel like that's a really smart way of looking at it, that you just want to get them down. And speaking of minds, what is it about the criminal mind or the mind of a murderer that really fascinates you? Because obviously it's been part of your entire career choosing this genre.
Yeah, well, the mystery is really all about who are we as people really. It comes from problem, and I know this may be psychobabble, but I feel that it comes from something that happened to me in my childhood. I had a very dear family friend. He was somebody that came to visit our house all the time, along with his mother, who was my mom's best friend. He was about, you know, I think he was in his 20s, 30. He felt like an uncle to me, and he was the kindest, gentlest person. And then at 18, when I went off to college, he murdered his sister-in-law. So I never saw that. I never saw anything at all upsetting or scary about this
Wow.
man. He went to prison. There was no doubt that he did it. Um, but it left me with the sense that you don't really know people. That you can talk to a smiling face and you have no idea what's going through their minds. So in a sense, that is the mystery genre right there. Which smiling face hides the monster? And I sort of feel compelled to keep on asking that question. I don't know the answer to that. I realize that I can't trust my own instincts. I realize that I can't tell who the bad guy is. And it's this constant search for who can you trust?
That's really profound. I love that. And so, how old were you when this happened?
It happened right after I went away to college when I was 18. But I have known him all through my childhood, and
Wow.
he was like a second father figure to me. He was really sweet. He was a really sweet man. So, um, and I don't like to use the word evil because that has a religious connotation. But I think that there are times when we have impulses that we can't control, and I think that's probably what happened.
It's incredible. What a story. Wow. I can see why you're fascinated. I mean, that growing up with someone so close and then having them do that. And was there a reason behind the murder? Like that
I think it was rage the way he killed her. I mean, that she was very badly battered, um, and because it was a part of the Chinese community in San Diego, it was hushed up. We knew about the trial. The trial was very public in San Diego, um, but the Chinese community itself did not want to talk about it because they already felt embattled as a minority group, and they did not want. They don't like to air their dirty laundry, and that was something that was just never mentioned. It kind of disappeared into history. But I remember the other thing that came out of that was I realized that I had a whopping case of false memory syndrome in that particular story. I remember the day he came to our house right after he had just finished killing his sister-in-law. I remembered in such vivid detail, and then I realized, looking back when I was doing research into it, I couldn't have remembered it because I was already off in college. It was my mother who
Wow.
had described. My mother had described that day in such detail that I thought I was there, and it really awakened my eyes to how we cannot trust our memories. Memories are changeable, and
Mhm.
and things can be implanted in there that we cannot trust.
It's fascinating and terrifying. But Tess, it's so great to see you. We always love picking your brain. Before we let you go, though, now that Listen to Me is out in bookstores, what's next for you?
I'm just finishing up a new novel. It's a standalone. It is, strangely enough, kind of a mystery spy novel. I live in a really odd town in Maine, a very small little town, and we have a large number of retired CIA up here. And so I love the idea of retirees who are forgotten by their profession, but who still have all their smarts. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if we had a retired 60-year-old woman spy who finds a dead body in her driveway? Is it because of something she did 20 years ago?
Mhm.
And she has to get her retired spy friends to come in and help her with this mystery.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, I can't wait for that one because the
Yeah.
spy genre to me is my favorite. I really have to say, like, it just
Wow.
there's something about that, the subterfuge and I love it. And it is true when you think about the brain power that's out there of
Mhm.
former spies. Imagine it like it'd be a great group, to get together and kind of
Talk it over.
red team something.
Yeah, yeah. So it's been fun, especially been fun thinking about how 60 and 70-year-olds are often discounted by society. So then we have this young small town female cop who comes in to try and solve the case, and she doesn't. She says, "Who are these old people? I'm not going to listen to them," not realizing what she's dealing with.
And do you have like people that that worked for the CIA that are able to open up and tell you a lot of different things for
They don't.
background?
They don't talk. They don't talk.
Talk.
I
Feeling of a crime.
tried. They won't. I mean, they're not allowed to really. Not if they were under unofficial cover.
That's great. Wow. Well, thank you again for coming and joining us today. Everyone, definitely check out Listen to Me. If nothing else, it'll work as a bathroom title for your kid, right? I love it. And,
Thanks a lot.
it's an absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you.